Here we go. The automotive service industry is a vast field. It consists of countless things like technology, sales, dealership, transport, production, insurance, and whatnot. It's so vast that for a newbie, this field could be a little intimidating, but not anymore. This time, we have with us Mike Bosch. He has been in the automotive service industry for over 24 years and has a thorough experience in this field. So, we have tried to break down his journey with the automotive service industry in this episode of Shift with Motordrift. Welcome, Mike. Glad to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
I'm excited to be here.
yeah. And I'm excited to have you, man. So my first question for you is,
Yeah,
how did your journey of being in the automotive service industry started?
it actually started very early. My dad was in the automotive industry growing up as a kid. So I was always around cars. And so I had a love of cars. And like a lot of people, right out of high school, I went into college and found early on that it really wasn't the direction that my life intended. So not knowing anything else, I fell into the car industry. I started out working for a new car dealership in the kind of the area that I lived, and then migrated into the parts department, which was really exciting because I got to work with the technicians and things like that. I'll never forget. I was working at a Nissan dealership in the mid to late 80s. I say that it was the late 80s, early 90s, right? So it was 89, 90, 91, right at the height of when the Nissan Skyline was brand new, right? And so we had a technician who had won a competition and actually got to go to Japan. And so he came back and he was talking about this elusive car that we would never see in the United States, and how much technology it had with the all-wheel drive and the four-wheel steering. And it was just fascinating to me. And then, of course, ironically, 25 years later, that car is able to be brought into the United States. So it was kind of interesting to be able to reflect back on those conversations that I had just early on in my career about the technology that was coming down the road. And then, of course, from there, I migrated into a more of a traditional customer service role. I found myself very fortunate that I do enjoy people as much as I enjoy cars. And so I do believe that you have to be a people person to work in the customer service industry. There's a lot of people that work in the customer service industry that are not people, but it is what it is. And so I found myself just drawn to that. I really enjoy helping people. I enjoy watching the evolution of a car going through the repair process. So that is how my career path went. And then 25 years later, here I am. Obviously, the evolution of cars, particularly in the United States, and I would imagine around the world, has definitely changed, even in just the past 4 or 5 years, with the advances in driver assist technology and things like that.
We have started now to see more and more self-driving and electric cars nowadays. But just 5 years
Yeah,
ago, electric cars weren't like a cool thing back then.
Oh, there's no question. In the United States, stereotypically, we always associated electric cars with California, right? Where there was, that kind of the environment where there was a lot of smog, a lot of environmental regulations, things of that nature. But even in some of the smaller towns in Texas where I live, electric cars are more and more common. I wouldn't say that they're prevalent, but they're definitely more and more common. You see the charging stations popping up all over the place where you can charge your electric car. It's not unusual to visit a location and somebody has their personal car plugged in and is charging it up or whatever, right? So it's definitely on the move, and it's definitely going to be a big thing moving forward. I would say right now there's a lot of buzz around the fact that the all electric Mustang was released in the United States, and there's definitely people on both sides of that fence on,
Hmm.
is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? There's the purists, right,
Yeah.
that feel like the Mustang should be a gasoline powered, standard shift, right,
Hmm.
because of the driving experience. And that's
Yeah.
one of the things that I really reflect on from time to time is as generations evolve,
Hmm.
do they still have the love of that driving experience
Hmm.
that connects somebody with their car?
Yeah. Because
I don't know what your
Mustang.
thoughts are on
Yeah.
that.
So I think that Elon Musk has done the magic of just bringing electric cars into our daily world, and I think that USA has
Yeah,
witnessed his magic more, and in India as well. Like I am seeing like more Model 3, Model X just coming in, and Tesla hasn't officially entered India as of now. So if they have not entered officially,
really.
and still their magic can be seen on the roads, like Tesla Model X, Tesla Model S, despite the taxes. Here, people are paying almost twice the money, but they are still buying it just because they are such a big fan of Elon Musk. So Elon Musk's personal branding
Yeah.
and Tesla's just marketing, they all did the magic.
Yeah, there's no question. And I think if you look at the evolution of just the electric car from the time it started, and you could go back probably 20 years to or
Hmm.
more for the first electric car. But when the electric car was really something that we started to see, if you look at the very first one to the versions today, the driving range,
Hmm.
right, has really made it to where it's something that the average person could actually be able to use. You don't have to sit there necessarily, if you're going to be driving back and forth to work, worry that you're not going to have enough power because
Hmm.
you're 50 miles or 100
Hmm.
miles away. So I think that's definitely the technology there has definitely allowed electric cars to integrate themselves into at least our culture for sure.
Yeah, because just about like 1 or 2 decades ago, electric cars had a maximum range of about 100 to 200 kilometers. So people considered them nothing more than
Yeah,
as city cars. They were like, dude, just buy it and you can just drive it in a city. The moment I drive it off the city,
right.
it loses its range, and then I have to wait for another 6 hours for it to get charged. So, anyways, people were not
Yeah.
attracted to electric cars. But then Tesla came in. They showed that electric cars are not slow. They are not like boxy designed. They are not like they don't take
Hmm.
much time to charge, and they can have as much range as IC vehicles. And and
Yeah.
it forced other manufacturers to take some learnings from Tesla and work on their own electric models. And now we are seeing the electric revolution all around the world.
Absolutely. And the acceleration, right?
Yeah, acceleration is the
I mean,
thing.
they get up to speed pretty quick.
Hmm.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, because the first time when I
Hey,
heard
let
this,
me ask you a question.
okay, okay.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah. So like when I saw that first time that a four-door sedan, which is the Tesla Model S, is beating a Lamborghini Aventador in
Mhm.
terms of acceleration, my mind went like boom. I'm like, here is a
I
person
know, right?
who's like, yeah, like you can be sitting with your family in your car and a Lamborghini Aventador will pull up next to you and you could be like, oh, I can smoke you in a drag race.
Yeah. Now, obviously, not that we advocate drag racing, but
Yeah.
absolutely for sure, right? It's amazing. It's amazing how little things like that. I mean, I don't know. Obviously, the car culture is different across the world, but
Hmm.
0 to 60 times have always been kind of an
Hmm.
advertised selling point for cars. So the acceleration that those cars have
Hmm.
is just unbelievable. Hey, I do want to ask you a question because
Hmm.
it's a little game that we've played, and a friend of mine reminded me of it last week ago or so.
Hmm.
Hypothetically,
Hmm.
okay, if you could drive any car
Hmm.
in the world,
Hmm.
okay, but you have to drive it every day. It has to be your daily driven car.
Okay.
You have to factor in maintenance. You have to, not the cost of the maintenance, but the practicality of getting your car maintained, right? So there has to be a relative dealer, right? Which
Hmm.
car would you drive? What car are you picking?
So the car, so should the car be currently on sale? Is it
No, it
like,
doesn't have to be. It just has to be a
um,
car that you're going to say, I'm going to drive this every single day. Not a car that I'm going to park in my garage and
hmm,
I'm going to wipe down and just
hmm.
stare at, but you have to factor in all the things. And you don't have to answer right now. You can think about it, but just hypothetically, what would be your dream car that you're going to drive every single day?
Oh, I'm prepared for this. It's going to be the Ferrari F12 TDF.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
because I have seen its engineering and technology. Like Ferrari is just one of those manufacturers that have literally nailed the production of their cars. If you take the F12 TDS as an example, it's a fast car, and it's a
Hmm.
it's a GT Grand Tourer. So Grand Tourer cars have like a bit of practicality. They are a bit more towards the practical side. So even though they are
Yep.
a two-seater,
Yep.
you still have like a good amount of boot space. You have enough space to fit in two golf bags, and I guess that's a lot of space for just two persons.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so you can like daily drive it.
Hmm.
You can hit good top speeds. You can drive it around the track. You can daily it, and you can probably pick up one of your kids from school.
That
Because
is
it's still a
funny.
two-seater.
That is funny. It's funny how. Let me ask you: Do you play golf?
No, I don't.
Do you golf?
No, no.
No, and I don't either. But it's funny how we use the golf bags as our point of reference to
Yeah.
trunk space. I do that too, but I
Hmm.
don't golf. But that's like the standard of how much trunk space I can fit a golf bag, or I can fit two golf bags. Anyway, I was just curious. So that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Because I have even seen like every reviewer out there is like, okay, you can fit two golf bags. So golf bags has always been a reference point. And I'm like, okay, so golf bags
Yeah.
are, because they're huge in size. They are not like small things. You
Hmm.
can't just fit them in any car.
No.
Yeah. And
Right.
they have width, they have
Absolutely.
length, they
That's
are
awesome.
heavy. So if a car can fit a golf bag, it's a practical car. That's basically the
Yeah.
standard
There
which
you
has
go.
been set in. And
That's a good
regarding
point of
the
reference.
yeah, and regarding the Mustang thing, I am a purist, so I want the
Hmm.
Mustang to retain that V8 or be a gasoline car for as long as possible. But seems like Ford is going
Yeah.
to planning to go electric as soon as possible. I read that from 2028 there would be no
Hmm.
option of getting a gas powered Mustang, and I'm like, dude, don't do this to the Mustang, please.
I know, and and I don't know if you know this, but back in the late '80s, they were actually looking at phasing the Mustang into a front wheel drive car, and there was a lot of negative publicity, and so Ford built the car. It became the Ford Probe, which was short lived, but that was going to be the replacement Mustang in the late '80s. So even though I think they say that it's going to be you don't know we don't know for sure what'll happen. When I look at that Mustang today, I'm not, I'm a fan of it. I think the new the E-Mach or whatever they're calling it is a beautiful car. But
Mackie.
except for it having the Mustang emblem on it,
Hmm.
that's the only thing that, and maybe the taillights have a little bit, but other than that, it really doesn't look like a Mustang to
Hmm.
me
Yeah.
when I think of what a Mustang looks like.
Yeah. So what basically Ford has done is that they have established the Mustang brand from about past 60 years now. The Mustang came out in
Mm-hmm.
1960s, I guess. So they have established the Mustang from the past few years. So they basically used it as a marketing tactic because they have already established the
Yeah.
Mustang name. So why not use that name further to
Mm-hmm.
market another one of our cars? And thus they could get some good sales number. That's what I think that Ford's target was
Mm-hmm.
originally. Here,
Oh, I don't disagree.
yeah. So in India here as well, we have a company called Tata Motors. So what they have done is that they have established an SUV named Safari, and with their news, and they have launched an
Mm-hmm.
all new seven-seater car, and they have branded it as Safari. So people were criticizing them as well that why did you use the name Safari? But I was like, dude, it's a marketing tactic. Ford used it for the Mustang Mach-E,
Yeah.
and in the same way, Tata is using it for the Safari. If a brand has established a name and they are using it further, I don't see a problem.
No, I don't quote see a
Yeah,
problem with it, but as a purist, I
yeah,
have a
as a
hard time
purist.
looking at that car and
Hmm.
say I see it as a Mustang,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
But that's just me.
yeah.
That's
And
just me.
people were like, dude, Mustang can't go with electric, and it's an
No.
electric crossover.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, and that's where the
For sure.
contradiction
For
began.
sure.
Because Mustang has been the face
Hmm.
of the American automotive industry for like over since the time of my grandpa and all, since those ages, and still it is.
Yeah,
Still
I mean, I
many
think
people consider it.
there's definitely I think there's definitely a few cars that you associate with American cars. Corvette would be
Hmm.
probably one of those, right? Obviously, the Corvette, Camaro, the Dodge Charger, and
Hmm.
the Ford Mustang.
Hmm. These are just the few cars. So now my next question is
Hmm.
that what's the car culture at the place you live in?
I would say that obviously we're living through the pandemic like
Hmm.
everybody in the world, and so that has had a far-reaching effect. I would say the car culture is very strong. I think there's definitely a strong car love. And it's funny in conversation. So when you meet somebody for the very first time, there's two questions that invariably come up. What do you do for a living? And what kind of car do you drive? Right. So in a lot of ways, our cars are part of our identity of who we are. I'm not saying it's healthy or anything like that, right? But that's just the reality of what things are. And so I think as far as where I live, of course, I live in the United States. I live in Texas, which is in the southern part. It's a bit more spread out, and so we do a lot of driving. We take a lot of road trips. And so there is a very strong connection to our cars, but it's very diverse. We'll see, big pickup trucks that are lifted up with big mudder tires on there, and you see your exotics. I drive 68, 69 miles back and forth to work, so one way. And on any given day, I could see a Lamborghini or a McLaren or a whole bunch of Ford pickup trucks, right? So it's very, very diverse. Pre-pandemic, there were a lot of car shows, right? A lot of car shows, and that was a big thing. People would plan their vacations around car shows. And then we had, and I don't know if you guys have them there, but we had these events, and they started out kind of unorganized, but they became organized, the Cars and Coffee. So it was not unusual on a Saturday morning to be able to go to a shopping center, and there's just 100 really nice cars that you could just walk around, and people love to talk about their car, in that environment, right? Now, I'm not saying that you see somebody driving a Ferrari at the and you can knock on their window and they want to have a conversation. But in that environment where they show up, they park, and they're talking to other people who have a love of cars, I think it's a very friendly and open environment where people they're very quick to share their stories, share the things that they have learned, right? Little tips and tricks along the way. So I would say the car culture is very strong here in America.
And one of the other things that I have seen there on the internet is that there is a place for everyone. If you have an exotic, there would be a place for you. There would be a group for you. If you have a pickup truck, there would be a group for you. If you have a JDM, there would be a group for you. So you don't ever feel like, dude, I'm out of this community. You always have some community to belong to. That's the thing I love most.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, can you give the audience and me a deep background of the automotive service industry, like explaining each and every aspect in detail?
Well, I think there's a couple different phases of it, right? So there's going to be the mechanical aspect of it, right? So you have your regular routine maintenance type stuff. And, we talk about electric cars. That's changing because electric cars don't require a lot of maintenance. We had this conversation at work the other day. Brakes and tires, that's about it, unless something really, wears out, but there's no real routine maintenance on an electric car. When you look at your gasoline model cars, because they are becoming more and more complex, I think there's less things that the average handyman or car guy or woman, right, can do themselves. So they are, there's more of you have to take it somewhere and you have to get it worked on. There's a lot of computers in the cars today. Now, when you go into, say, the collision repair part of the industry, that's a really complicated process, right? Because all of the manufacturers have now come out with what their standard is of how the car needs to be repaired. There are those driverless or those advanced drivers assist systems that we talked about briefly earlier. Those are very, very complicated, and those have to be programmed and calibrated to ensure that the car is going to operate the way that the car was intended to do. So it's definitely something that has garnered a lot of conversation over the past couple of years, and making sure that if you are in the business of being in the automotive service industry, that you have the training and the tools available to you to be able to perform whatever service it is that you're being asked to, whether it's mechanical and routine maintenance, or whether it is for automotive collision repair or something like that.
And cars are really like becoming more and more like complex nowadays. Like literally one of the few days ago,
Mhm.
I saw a Ferrari SF90 Stradale, and I saw that it had a V8 engine which is twin turbocharged, and then it has three electric motors, and then there are like different suspension mount brakes and all. I'm like, dude, that's so complex to understand just by reading it. I can't imagine how complex it would be while working
Yeah.
upon the car. It's like it would be like so tiring for
No,
the
and
mechanics.
that's the thing. You can't take that car just, yeah, you can't take that car just to anybody,
Hmm.
right? You have to take that car to somebody who knows that car, who has the right tools and has the right computer, software, and who has access to all of the procedures and everything. Or you're not going to get all the things done in the right way. And that's why I asked you that
Hmm.
hypothetical. And I was surprised that you said Ferrari,
Hmm.
because while Ferrari is a beautiful car, not everybody can service a Ferrari,
Hmm.
right? So if you're going to daily drive that Ferrari, you have to take that
Hmm.
into consideration.
Yeah, I know, but like the FL TDF is kind of like it just has a big 6.3-liter V12 engine, and that's the only
Yeah.
complex part. That's only the one complex part. But when you take into
Okay.
consideration a hybrid car like the SF90 Stradale, it has a V
Oh yeah.
it has a V8 engine which is huge. Then it has twin turbos over it. Then it has three electric motors. So the complexity level just
Yeah.
goes on and on and on. And only a Ferrari official can reply
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And one of the things that not if I wasn't in the auto service industry, that I wouldn't have really even given a lot of consideration to, is there are on hybrid cars and electric cars, there are orange wires
Hmm.
that are high voltage,
Hmm.
right? So you have to have special gloves to even unplug those orange wires. Like you have to
Hmm.
discharge all of the built up energy before you unplug them, or you actually run the risk of being seriously injured, right? So if the average at-home mechanic
Hmm.
buys one of these cars that has those orange wires, and you go to unplugging them because you think you are going to be able to change the air filter, or
Hmm.
you're going to be able to do this or
Hmm.
that, you definitely run the risk of doing seriously bodily injury. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. That is a real thing.
Yeah, because with the cars like these, people kind of assume that okay, I have repaired cars in the past, so it would be the same, but it's not always the same
Yeah.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like with newer cars, things are evolving and you don't know that what might be there, so it's better to check and read about it first than just go and do it yourself.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely want to do the research. Know what you're getting yourself into. I mean, they're beautiful cars and I love the advancements, but just make sure you're safe and you don't get yourself in over your head and put yourself in a dangerous situation.
Hmm. So since you have been in the industry for long enough, I'm sure you would have experienced the transition from going IC dominated vehicles to electric. So how was that transition for you?
I would say that we're still in that transition.
Hmm.
But I think, like, we've talked a little bit. I mean, it's definitely more and more common, and it's not going to stop. It's
Hmm.
building momentum, and it's going to continue to be more and more common. And I can, while I'm a I love the car experience and I love the driving experience, I could see owning an electric car in my lifetime personally, right?
Hmm.
Whereas maybe 5 years ago, I would not have thought that that would be something that I would say. But they've definitely, they're very, even if you just look at the styling of them,
Hmm.
right? They're not
Yeah.
boxy, unattractive cars. They're
Hmm.
very sleek. They're very stylish. They're aerodynamic. I mean, like you
Hmm.
said, even Ferrari has that hybrid car, right? And so I think it's one of those things that kind of snuck into the culture,
Yeah.
right? And then it's stuck around long enough. And now
Hmm.
I think obviously with a lot of the factors, right, with
Hmm.
the environmental concerns and being awareness of fossil fuels and things like that, I think it's like the kind of
Hmm.
the perfect storm, and everything is pushing in that direction. So I definitely think that there's a very good chance in my lifetime that we'll see the shift of percentage of electric versus gasoline motor cars, right, to
Hmm.
shift, and maybe the percentages are flipped. I don't think it'll be 100%, but I think it's very likely that the percentages flip and there's more electric or hybrid electric cars than there are solely gasoline cars.
Yeah. So I think in that in about 14 years, like till 2035, most of the countries will like push the EVs to a level that we would see more electric cars on the road than IC, and the emission rules would get so strict that it won't be even
Yeah.
possible for manufacturers to make an IC car. So ultimately, we would see cars like these more. But if like some manufacturer comes up with an alternative fuel, I know that Porsche is working on an alternative fuel. So if they come out with an alternative fuel, then that can be great for us because IC cars will then remain for a long time. That's what I think.
Yeah.
That alternative fuel thing,
Yeah. And
that's
I know,
important.
yeah, and I know we've had some alternative fuels over the years. I mean, we've had vehicles that you see them, and a lot of times they're owned by cities. They're powered by natural gas.
Hmm.
Or when I was a teenager, I had a buddy whose dad's car, he had a van. It was powered by propane.
Hmm.
And I know that BMW has experiments with hydrogen power, right? So there's
Hmm.
definitely research being done out there to get us off of crude oil dependence. But it does seem like at least temporarily electric is the
Hmm.
version of that that has integrated itself into the industry.
Yeah, like but the alternative fuel that Porsche is working upon seems to be like much more realistic. And like other manufacturers, I've seen that Toyota was working on hydrogen, but like it still has a long way to go, the hydrogen part development, because hydrogen vehicles still run the risks for exploding in the middle of a road. And we know the power of hydrogen. It
Yeah.
can literally blast like 10 to 15 cars around the area. So it's not safe from the a safety perspective. But yeah, let's see, man. Alternative fuels should get on the way, and I want them to like sustain so that we can see our Mustang V8s for a long time. I really want to see those cars for a long time.
Yeah. See, I thought the risk of the car exploding added to the excitement of it. Is it?
No, but like from a safety perspective, use like what if the car just blows up
Yeah,
like while you're
absolutely.
sitting on a red light, while you are just waiting for the light to turn green? What if some malfunction happens and they're literally like there would be a huge
Yeah.
casualty. There would be like a huge number of
Yeah, that
casualty.
would not be good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
that
the
would not
only
be good.
problem I have with hydrogen. Rest is great. I'm sure like you would have seen the transition of most cars going from manual to automatic. So how do you feel about this transition?
Mm. You know, it's funny because working in the automotive service industry, as long as I have got to see kind of a new generation come in behind me, right?
Yeah.
So I'm in my late 40s now.
Hmm.
So I see the younger generation come in the early 20s. They can't even drive a standard shift. Like
I can. Yeah.
when I was
Hmm.
young, that's what I first learned how to drive. I learned
Hmm.
how to drive on a standard shift where it was shift on the column, you know,
Hmm.
the three on the tree,
Yeah.
as they used to call it, right? And so it was just really, really common. And it took me a while to really even get my head wrapped around somebody that couldn't drive a standard. And then
Hmm.
it was, then you knew to ask somebody, well, can you drive a standard? And it was very common,
Hmm.
no. And so I think, you know, a lot of the manufacturers seem to be going to that hybrid where you have the automatic transmission, but then you can shift it into manual shift mode and either shift it with the gear selector or
Hmm.
you have the paddle shift up and down. And so it's kind of a blend of the two. It's not exactly the
Hmm.
same, right, as
Yeah.
having the the clutch and the you
Hmm.
know, it's almost like a dance that you're doing. It's
Hmm.
very synchronized and all that.
Hmm.
Having grown up during the era that I did, so I was in high school in the late 80s.
Hmm.
I had a Mustang GT
Yo.
that I drove in high school. So it was a 5-speed.
Hmm.
You know, it had 210 horsepower, which
Hmm.
at the time that was a
Hmm.
lot of
Yeah.
horsepower, especially for a high school kid. And so it was
Hmm.
not uncommon for us to pull up to the red light leaving high
Hmm.
school and you know, do burnouts leaving the parking lot. I'm sure the school administrator wasn't too crazy about that, but
Hmm.
I lived in a small town and we got away with it. So I can't imagine not being able to know how to drive a standard shift vehicle. So the classic car that I'm restoring in my garage,
Hmm.
I left it a standard shift,
Hmm.
and a couple of people have asked me, well, why wouldn't you switch it
Hmm.
over to an automatic? I'm like, no,
Hmm.
I don't want an automatic. I want to be able to experience that control, and it's almost like you become one with the car
Hmm.
because the car is very dependent on you doing something for it to be able to operate a certain way. Not to
Yeah.
say that in stop and go traffic,
Hmm.
an automatic transmission is so much better, right? But if we really look at the automotive driving experience, for me at least, standard shift is the only way to go.
Same for me as well, cause like I have seen newbie drivers and and I've seen them confused when they see a 6-speed manual transmission. They are like, well,
Oh yeah.
I going to drive this? Give me an automatic. But
Hmm.
here the condition is like opposite of that. Here, like most of the folks are like relatively new to automatic, and they are more accustomed to manual. So in India, I think it would take about 5 to 10 years more for manuals to go extinct. Because I read a sales
Mm.
report that less than 2% of the cars that are being sold are manual. Almost every country out there, in USA, in India, less than 2%. So 98% cars are automatic. So it won't take much long for automatic cars to dominate on the roads, and manuals will ultimately go away then.
Yeah.
But they are still
Yeah. I mean, I don't know
manufacturers.
the statistics, obviously.
Yeah, but there are still
Say that one more
manufacturers.
time.
Yeah, but I appreciate the fact that there are still manufacturers who are keeping the manual alive, such as Nissan, Porsche,
Yeah.
yeah, and even Ford with its Mustang GT. The Mustang GT
Yeah. But
still
you, if
comes
you
up
look
with
at
6-speed manual.
if you look at Porsche as an example, though, if you look at Porsche 20 years ago to Porsche today, now obviously they have more car models, right, with
Yeah.
the SUVs and the four door. But if you look at their automatic to manual
Hmm.
probably sales numbers,
Hmm.
I bet they have, 20 years ago, an automatic Porsche that was rare.
Hmm.
Like maybe you saw one,
Hmm.
once in a blue moon. Now there's
Hmm.
probably, while they still do sell and manufacture a lot of, the standard transmissions in the Carrera and
Hmm.
the um, Cayman,
Yeah.
Cayenne, right? The,
Yeah.
the, the SUVs, they're all automatic.
Hmm. They're all automatic. Only the sports cars of they are, and that
Hmm.
to the top tier ones. That to the
Right.
top tier ones are like mostly dominated by manual. You can still get a manual in that. And um, if you would have seen the 911 GT3, since its first generation, like 20 years ago, it has come up with a manual. And the head of the project, he's like, "Oh, dude, till the day I am the head of this 911 GT3 project, I will make sure that the car has a manual." So I was like, "Wow, great to hear that." He was like, "Dude,
That's funny.
I will
That's
keep the
funny.
engine naturally aspirated and the transmission to manual for as long as I'm the head of the project."
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
And even if we see Nissan, you see, like they're not in a good condition at the moment. Like I'm not seeing Nissan doing very much like huge number of sales, but still like Nissan has decided to go with a manual in their new sports car, the 400Z. So like I
Mhm.
respect them for like appreciating the manual community, that okay, save the manual, save the manual. So they are literally like sticking to the word.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's funny.
Now, what car do you own, by the way?
So I actually have I have several cars.
Okay.
So we have four people in our family, right? So
Hmm.
I have a company car that I
Hmm.
drive back and forth to work. It's a Nissan. I have a Rogue, a
Hmm.
little SUV.
Hmm.
We recently replaced my wife's car. I bought her a Sentra Nismo edition, so it's 4-cylinder turbo.
Hmm.
And then my two boys both have Mustangs.
Yeah.
My oldest has a GT California Special,
Hmm.
and my youngest has an EcoBoost, which
Hmm.
is the 4-cylinder turbo, which has a crazy amount of acceleration.
Hmm.
And then I'm currently restoring a 1965 Ford Falcon uh, for my personal
Hmm.
vehicle. I bought it about 4 years ago as a father-son project to work on with my dad, and it's definitely a work in progress.
So when did you get this classic cars of yours, like the Ford Falcon? When did you get this idea that okay, I'm like I have to restore this car in my garage? When did this idea came into your
Well,
mind?
yeah, it's funny. So growing up, my dad was always into cars,
Hmm.
and for some reason, he gravitated to the Falcon. And so over his probably over a 30-year time period, he had 40 of them. And so about 4 years ago, I decided I was like, hey, I'm gonna buy a car, and I'm gonna spend some time with him. It's just like as you get older and your
Yeah.
parents are getting older, you recognize
Hmm.
that time is precious and limited.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to make sure that I spent some more time with him, and it was kind of an excuse to do
Hmm.
so. And so I thought, well, what car would I buy? I could buy a Mustang, of course, but he was always into the Ford Falcon. And so I knew a lot about the Ford Falcon. And so I searched out, I was able to find one, found a little 2-door sedan. So it's kind of like a little, a lot of people would refer to it as like a grandma car, a little grocery getter car. But it's a classic style. And it's funny because when I bought the car, I had the plans like most everybody. I was going to put a V8 automatic in it. And it had an inline 6-cylinder, 3-speed column shift setup. And I was like, you know what? After doing a little bit of research and talking to some people, I was like, you know what? I'm going to leave it as a 6-cylinder. I'm going to hop it up, give it as much horsepower as I can, because it's not something that you would see as common. I mean, everybody has a V8, car from the 60s, but these straight 6s, which are very, very reliable, and the weight distribution on them is really, really good, because while the motor doesn't produce as much horsepower, it doesn't weigh nearly as much either. So you have a nice distribution of horsepower to weight. And so it's one of those things, being in the automotive service industry, I have learned some things over the years, right? So I could do a lot of the work myself. It's not a super complicated car. There's no computers. And so that's kind of how I ended up where I'm at today with it.
Yeah, and cars like these, like I believe that they should be left the way they are. Like if they came up with an originally an inline 6, then dude, just leave it to that. Like the car was engineered the way it is, so just let it remain that way. Cause like the engine mismatch, it does not fit very well with the car, and like just retain those horsepower numbers. Cause a stock car is a beauty in its own.
Absolutely, I totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah.
It's crazy because in America, it's really common to build a hot rod car from the 30s and the 40s. And there's a lot of people, they'll just put a Chevrolet, regardless of what kind of car it is, they'll put a Chevrolet motor in it, because a Chevrolet 350 V8 motor is the easiest motor to get parts for. And it drives me crazy personally when I see a Ford car from the 30s, that classic 32 Ford with a Chevrolet motor in it. And I get it. Everybody has their opinions, and it's their choice, their car. But for me, if it's a Ford, it needs to have a Ford motor. If it's a Dodge, it needs to have a Dodge motor. And then of course, if you choose to drive a Chevy, put a Chevy motor in it.
Yeah. In India as well, there is a American sports car collector. He's like literally a fan of American sports cars. So he has a hot rod from the 1930s, and he has like literally like he has a Ford. It's a Ford hot rod, and it has a Ford motor in it as well. So like
there you go.
Yeah. He has a great taste in cars. He recently built a drag specific Mustang for him, and its tires are like this thick. I was just bonkers to see that like the tires on a car can be that thick as well, but it's specifically been made for drag races. So,
Gotcha. Got to have that traction.
Yeah. So like, was it expensive, this car, the Ford Falcon of yours? Is it expensive to build it?
Well, I mean, I guess that's a relative term, right? And so I'm doing it. If you were asked my wife if it was expensive, she, without hesitation, she would answer, yes, it's expensive, right? When you think about the fact that what cars cost today, I would say, I wouldn't say it's expensive. It's not cheap either. It costs what it costs, and things are definitely on the rise. The car that I'm building today, if I was to build that same car 15 years ago, it's probably costing me 3 to 4 times the cost today than it was 15 years ago. Parts are harder to get. They don't, as things get older, they don't get cheaper in price a lot of times, especially, particularly the parts, right? They go up in price because they're harder to find. And I think at the end of the day, you look at a car like the one I'm building, and 15 years ago, they would max out at $10,000. $10,000 is the most any one of those cars would sell for. But nowadays, I'm not saying my car, right? My car's got a long way to go, but cars like mine that are fixed up, fully restored, they're selling in the high 20s, low 30s, right? $1,000. And so it's definitely something that at the end of the day, I don't have plans to build it to that degree. I should be able to get out of it what I put into it if I chose to sell it, because I did a lot of the work myself. Now, if I was didn't have the ability to do the work myself, and I had to pay somebody to do everything for me, I would not be able to even get my money or my investment out of this car.
Yeah. So, like, what do you finally plan to do with it? Like, just keep the stock motor or what?
Yeah, so it has the stock motor, but I put a header on it. I just recently this week got a 2-barrel. It originally had a 1-barrel carburetor, so I'm going to the upgrade for the 2-barrel carburetor. I went from the 3-speed manual transmission to a 5-speed manual transmission.
Yeah.
It had a 4-lug drum brakes, at all 4 corners. I upgraded it to a bigger rear end with front disc brakes. So my plan is to be able to drive the car back and forth to work on the days that I want to. I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm going to drive the car every single day, because it doesn't have anti-lock brakes and it doesn't have airbags and it doesn't have those features that, quite honestly, you need to have. But I want to also be able to feel comfortable if I do drive it to work, that it will get me there, not break down on the side of the road. And what's funny is I'm at a quandary. It's got the original paint, and so it's white, so it's faded. It's got some rusty spots. And in America, we call that patina. So it's got this nice patina where it's aged. My wife wants me to paint it, and all of her friends, but part of me is like, well, if I don't paint it, if I take it somewhere and somebody opens their door into it and puts a big dent in the door or chips the paint, I'm not going to be upset. But if I spend all the time and the money to paint the car, then I got to worry about parking it somewhere and parking it at the back of the parking lot, taking it 4 spots. So it really just depends on a couple of factors. But ultimately, my long-term play is just to be able to enjoy the car.
Yeah. As a great weekend car.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you plan on restoring more such cars in your garage, or did you have enough with this one?
Yeah, I got to be honest. That's something that it's definitely taking. It's taken more time than I thought it would take, right? And at the age that I'm at right now, I can honestly say this will be the one and only car that I do in garage rest. It takes up a lot of time, a lot of space. I had to rent a storage facility to keep extra parts in because they wouldn't fit in my garage with my wife's car and my car and all the tools necessary. Right. So that's a great question. But no, I'm one and done on this venture for sure.
So can you explain to the audience that what is going to be the future of the automotive service industry, according to you?
Yeah, I think according to me, it's definitely going to be more focused on just the name, the customer service, right? I think we have to be more in tune to what customers expect. And so if you think about the shift in making things more convenient, electronic, online, all those things, that's going to be the shift of the customer service industry. I think it's more a focus on, we relate it to Chick-fil-A here in America, right? Chick-fil-A, I don't know if you're familiar, but it's a fast food chain, right?
Okay.
But the customer service at the Chick-fil-A is so much more superior that at everywhere else. And so that's kind of the standard. And I think it's making sure that you are treating the individual and not the car itself, right? The car is a commodity. And as people have more and more choice in what they do, you want to make sure that you're meeting their need, or exceeding their expectations, right? And so I think there's always going to be that evolution of a better, friendlier, faster approach.
So Mike, do you have any parting words for the audience?
I wouldn't say parting words. I mean, I very much appreciate you having me on this morning. I got to be honest, it's a little intimidating to represent the car culture in America. So these opinions expressed are the opinions solely of Mike Bosch and not those of any. No, just kidding. No, I appreciate you having me on. I'm always interested to hear what other people's perspectives are. It's funny how it's easy to think of your world as this small little scope because that's what you see every single day. And then to realize that obviously it's much, much bigger. So it's exciting to hear that there is a car interest, you know, halfway around the world, the same that we have here in Texas and in America. So I wish everybody the best. I hope that, you know, I hope you get your dream car someday. I hope you get that Ferrari and you can drive it every single day. And you're not
Thank you,
like, oh
man.
my gosh, when am I going to, where can I get the oil changed on this thing?
Yeah, it's good to network with people, man. Like I recently did another podcast with a Southie super truck racer from North Carolina. So like it was great to hear like someone's else
Nice.
perspective on racing as well. Because here in India we don't
Yeah.
have many four
Oh
wheeling
yeah.
racing, but then I got to experience about okay, so this is a super truck series and all. So it was great, man. Like it gives me a perspective of the car culture around the world. So thank you, man, for doing this.
That's
I appreciate
awesome.
it. I appreciate
No,
it.
thanks for having me on. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
I trust the audience is going to get a huge value from this episode.
I hope so.